today's project is to take all of these rotten, destroyed bits and get good timber and replicate them. Some of them are quite difficult, like this. All of them are quite ruined, like that. And yeah, there's a few that might challenge our ingenuity, but we'll see how we go.
Welcome to Free Range Sailing. For those of you that are new here, our boat Marul is a Clansman 30. She's a fiberglass 30-foot masthead sloop built in New South Wales in 1969. Troy bought her 7 years ago in Cairns and sailed her around the top of Australia all the way to Perth. 3.5 years ago, we sailed north from Perth to circumnavigate the Australian continent together, filming our cruising adventures and attending to any essential maintenance along the way. We are currently in lockdown in Tasmania, the southernmost part of the continent, where we've decided to carry out a long overdue refit. If you want to be notified of all our weekly refit videos over the coming months, make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit the bell button.
Okay, so these timbers, it might not be obvious to look at them, but they used to be our hatch surrounds on our companionway.
If you're not familiar with nautical terms, our companionway means the raised hatchway and step that leads down to the interior of our boat from the deck.
The reason these needed replacement, they weren't like this as they were in use, but they fell apart as we were pulling them out, is because rot had set in. That is pretty bad. Underneath it, like, it was still quite hard timber, but you have to go in like 5 mil, so they're not so great. So what we need to do now is just measure the width and length and do a little bit of a shopping list to get them. So I can get that out of inch timber there, but it'll just mean that I have to adjust that bandsaw and do some angled cuts on it, and then I can do it with a front piece as well. So there's going to be a fair bit of tricky cutting today, but getting that and that are probably not as difficult as they seem just looking at it. They don't look like a really fun time is going to be had. I don't know, rising to meet a challenge. Do you think we can do it, Pascal?
I think you can.
We'll see how we go.
I'll provide moral support.
Okay, we've got them fairly close. So I'll just glue everything together now. Once it's all glued up, then we can just fair everything. You definitely see that there will be two different woods here though, but most of the time there'll be a hatch like this and you'll just see this, and this will be nice and shiny and varnished. If anyone wanted to break in when we had our boat locked up, all they would need is a Leatherman and undo those.
Oh yeah.
They're supposed to be through bolted.
Yep.
With nuts on the other side.
Side. It's all
And in fact, I thought they were to this. It was all a lie. I think a shipbuilder put some of these things together because it's all copper nails. So that's 1.25 inches, and we will get that piece out of there. So what I'll do is I'll use that flat as a reference point, and I should be able to just get that angle with the table saw, but that is a curved angle, so we're going to have to get that again by setting up the bandsaw. Now that's gone fairly well. I need to glue it up and also dock the ends because it's a bit long. But we can see we've got a fairly good approximation of what we had there. So this bit of wood here, I've ripped it, and what ripping means is I passed it down the saw blade and cut a sliver off it so that it's narrower at the bottom and wider at the top, because this is as well. So I've got the width and the angle just right. So now I'm using this old bit to measure this height here and that distance there to replicate this, because in 2 cuts I'm going to make this groove rather than use the router table. So I'll be able to put this face against here, run it through the saw, and this blade will actually be buried up in the timber. And then once I've done that, then I'll do exactly the same thing for measuring that cut there. I'll just put it against there, move this fence, and I'll put a cut into here, and all of that groove will be cut into the timber. I guess in theory, you bang this over, it should match up. Well, that looks pretty good.
It's magnetic.
That little gauge is a great thing. It's the first time I've seen them where you can find that zero and then the angle of the saw blade. Check up all your machines before you make your cuts. It just makes life so simple. I can see if I look in this corner here that this needs to come in a bit more, because this can just be ground out just a little bit. It needs just a touch more clearance right in this corner here, so that's no big deal. That's not a bad initial cut. So I'll use this bit just to grind up in there. So there it is, there's our modified cut. And we can see it's following that line fairly well. It just needs that angle pushed up a bit further now with that grinding tool. But that's fitting a lot better. I took a little bit out of the boat here, also with that grinding tool, and you can see that this is fitting a lot better as well. Not a bad fit. So this side is nice and flush. This one is just a couple of mil high, but I might just take a little bit just off this side, because I can feel under here and there's a tiny lip as well. If we see here, you know, like it thickens a bit up here, so we might just take a little bit off there. So both of those are pretty even now. So by the time that's got some thickened epoxy glue under there, it's going to be another, you know, like millimetre higher. So it's going to be about there. So then all we need to do is just trim off a little corner over here, and that hatch surround is should be pretty snug. Now where our companionway hatch comes in, if we just have a look here at the bottom, it's a little bit irregular. So I've made a nice square piece that's going to go in. It's the step. So what I do have to do is, just to make it fit, is just take my little palm plane and take a little bit off the shoulders just here. So this little plane, you wouldn't think so, but, or maybe you would. But because we've been doing quite a bit of timber fit out, just for those final fits, just having a nice little sharp palm plane just to take off some little bits and just make that final finish, that final fit, has been just incredibly useful. It wasn't expensive. I've owned it for years. It's not as sharp as it possibly could be. I haven't put it over a water stone for a little while. But you know, it's still, even off hardwood, it's still taking nice little tiny thin spiral shaving. If you are doing a timber fit out on a boat, I think having a little plane is probably a nice little tool to have, but I wouldn't consider it absolutely vital. You could probably sneak up on this with some files or even some rough sandpaper, to be honest. If we have a look at how I actually made the step itself, all it is that shaped bit of wood there, and I just cut a groove or a dado straight down. It's about 5 mils deep, and then it's really, really nice and tight. I had to get this in with a hammer, and then I just pop this in at right angles, and that's glue, and it's a really good long grain join, so it's quite strong in and of itself. These little Barco knives that I use for just about everything, they're actually marketed as a carpenter's knife. And I'll tell you what, for marking out timber, but also just instead of getting in here with a chisel, being able to have a really fine point and a variable width chisel actually is just for this sort of stuff. I can just really sneak up on a final fit here. Admittedly, the knife has to be sharp, and you really have to be careful. It's probably not quite as safe as a chisel. But having a very sharp point that I can actually get in and square up the corners where I want this timber to go has been really useful. I'll see how this goes now. Oh, like a thumb in a bum. So, and that's exactly how I like these the fits to be. I like to not just slot in and rattle around. I like just to. And not, I don't want to have to like smash this thing in, but that's quite nice, just with the bottom of my hand, and even there, everything is nice and firm. I'll epoxy this in. The weather's not looking all that great, but luckily this is inside the hatch, so I might get away with this one. Okay, we're at the stage now where it's finally time to do the hatch refurbishment. So the first thing I need to do is to know where I'm going to make my cuts out of there. So we'll just give this a quick measure. So they're 40 mil. So we'll go and we'll just transfer 40 mil lines from either end, and we'll cut it out and we'll get rid of all of that stuff. We need to get this hatch up and working before we take the dodger off, and that's part of what we're going to do when we pull the boat out. So we've decided to pull the boat out, do the whole deck. And that's just part of it. So that's where that timber ends there. So I guess we'll just
go along the Kiwi grip.
just go the Kiwi grip. Off. This poor old 3/4 inch chisel. Look at it. I haven't it's led a pretty checkered past, this thing, but I haven't reground it because I have been just using it during refit as a mini pry bar, which is a pretty evil thing to do, but there is a good chisel that's been held aside. So there we can see that this was just stitch and glued. See, this was just a bit that I'd sort of glued in there, but the fiberglass over the top made it quite strong. we'll see how this comes off. I mean, these are very old screws that are holding this down. We've allowed a whole day for this job.
Oh, goodness. Oh, you got it.
These are incredibly old copper screws, you know, so they weren't coming out. They're corroded as hell. The heads are soft as anything, and they're slots. See, they're not Phillips.
Yeah.
So our continuing quest to just rid the world of slot-headed screws continues.
We've just jumped forward in time so that we could continue the story of our hatch rebuild in this episode. Marul has been hauled out so we can begin work on the deck. You'll notice the rigging is removed and the antifoul looks pretty good. There'll be more on that in future episodes, so for now it's back to the hatch. Well, like just about everything on Marul, this hatch is getting an overhaul, the hatch lid. Troy's really gone hard on this, sanding it back, and we're at the thickened epoxy stage, so it's just reinforcing and putting good strong fillets here along the channels which slide in and out. The next step was to create a moulded bed using thickened epoxy to mount the timber on the front of the hatch lid. We used packing tape around the piece of wood so that the epoxy would not stick to it. The rounded edge of a tongue depressor finished off the sides nicely. A tongue depressor can also be cut into a chisel shape to remove excess epoxy. The more we remove now, the less we will have to sand off later. While waiting for the epoxy bed to set, Troy polished some thickened epoxy we'd applied earlier to the channels, using his gloved finger and some denatured alcohol. As the epoxy had not quite set, rubbing with alcohol gave it a nice smooth finish, once again avoiding the need for sanding. As you can see, packing tape works really well for making moulds with thickened epoxy. Satisfied with the shape of the epoxy bed, we just needed to fill the voids and give the finished job a final sand before installation.
Ooh, it perfectly matches that angle. Like that angle there and that angle there exactly mirror each other. That's good. That epoxy bed that we made sort of mirrors that quite well. When I secure this, we'll just be putting a little bit of polysulfide sealant in there anyway, because this has to come off. We can't just epoxy it all together. The reason it has to come off is to get the hatch off, you have to be able to remove that to keep going. So we should be able to get that so it mates up pretty well. What we might do is just put a little rubber gasket on the top of our drop board to keep the weather out. We'll put a padlock, some sort of hasp and staple on there for trying to keep criminals out if we ever go to somewhere where there is criminals. These channels here, we salvaged them. Another boat sort of threw them away. So we've got that, and we'll pop this hatch off in a second. But what we've got there is a bit of bronze sail track that fits nicely in here. The bronze isn't in contact with the aluminium very much at all. The whole hatch is sliding on HDPE runners. which makes it quite smooth. The little the bronze sail track only exists to stop it from coming out. So for the most of the time what you have is just HDPE in contact with this smooth aluminium, so it makes for a very smooth acting hatch, which is pretty good. And we're refurbishing the hatch in general, but I'll take this off and we'll just have a look at how this is attached. So now it can get free of there.
So you've seen Troy remove the hatch, and now you can see a lot better the hatch combing here that Troy put together quite some time ago now, about 3 months ago. He installed it with thickened epoxy and everything, and we actually put a protective coat of epoxy on here, but we're yet to sand it back and really finish it and put a protective coat of UV resistant varnish on here. There's a few little bits and pieces that need fixing, like that need just finessing, a little bit of planing and just getting straight. There's some sledgehammering, steel boat in the shed, quite a way away from us, but it's really loud, so apologies for the noise. We're trying our best to film when there's not noise, but it's a bit tricky at the moment. We've also put a nice fillet of thickened epoxy in here, so there's a smooth contour up here, and Troy's put this salvaged aluminium from another boat in here as our channel. And that's about it really. Let's just go down and see what's left to be done on the hatch, but it's secure now to protect from the weather, because what we really needed with the boat out of the water without the dodger, as you can see the dodger's been removed, but that's coming up in another video, what we really needed is to make sure that the weather wouldn't come in without that protective dodger over our companionway, and it's working really well so far.
It's obviously still a work in progress because all of this needs to be painted and everything else like that. And these are not the final screws that we're going to use, but at the moment with spring it's the storm season here in Tassie, so we just had to quickly get it on. It'll be coming off. Every screw that goes into this channel will be coated with epoxy before it gets screwed in. That, what would you call it? That front piece of this hatch, it's secured by M6, 6mm machine screws like that, countersunk. So what we've done is we've just got these threaded inserts drilled out to 8mm, resined in there, so really stuck in there, and then these 6mm machine screws are what is holding that timber in there. And as I said, it has to be a removable, but it has to be strong. The other ones I just sort of screwed into there, and when you use just a wood screw going into a hatch, the constant wear and tear on it eventually made it loose, and it's constantly coming off. It's a real pain the way it was constructed. But this will be a stronger setup. So you can see that's a strip of polyethylene, HDPE, high density polyethylene, and that's actually what the whole hatch is running on, because the channel comes in under here and that contacts it. So there'll be more securing screws going through here, but I've just got those at the moment. All of these, just filed them round, just it makes it easier to go in the channels, prevents any injury. So this will be really nice once it's all painted up and give us a good fairing. So I reckon that this repair should last quite a few years.
Thanks for watching us overhaul and rebuild our companionway hatch this week. If you haven't already, thanks for giving the video a thumbs up, and we'd love it if you'd subscribe to our channel. It really helps us out.